without much delay, we are going to get into the content part of the webinar. So really excited to have Danielle, who's a user researcher at TWG, where she helps lead and work on user research initiatives for most of the product companies that we work with at TWG. She works and conducts research through all phases of product development, from developing a product strategy for very early stage, even like strategy kind of engagements / business definition kind of engagements, to also post-launch testing and optimization. Danielle is also really involved in the community itself, so she helps lead the UXRTO meetup in Toronto, which is a space for UX researchers. So Danielle, let's welcome Danielle onto our virtual stage.
Hello.
Awesome. Danielle, I already gave an awesome, you're already getting some virtual claps of introduction from the audience. If you can, give a brief introduction, and then you can dive straight into the webinar, and I will be backstage.
Definitely. And so, hello, everybody that's joining us. Hope you're having a fabulous day so far. Thanks, Preet, for that really great introduction. So, as he mentioned, I'm a user researcher at the working group, TWG, and I do conduct research at all phases of product development. But I do have a particular interest in usability. I started my career conducting pretty much back-to-back usability sessions, and I've since run sessions with hundreds of users of all different kinds on dozens of different products and initiatives. So just really excited to be speaking about this topic. It's something that I'm definitely really passionate about. And so through my work, I get to see firsthand how people actually experience websites and apps and products, and how much you can actually learn by putting your work to the test and putting it in front of people. I find usability to be such a humbling experience. Working in technology and design, our decisions might seem really obvious, in our own context, but once we put them in front of real people, we never know for sure if they're going to work. So just, always keeping in mind, friends, that you are not your user, and that's essentially what I'm going to be discussing today. This kind of is something we already went over, but it's nice to meet every one of you. I know we have people from all different, skill levels, experience levels. So, depending on how much experience you have with usability, I'm hoping to be able to provide lots of content for everybody. Usability is a big part of my work. I'm really passionate about advocating for testing. It's, it really is meant to be baked into our human-centered design process and our UX process. However, I'm noticing more and more that it's often pushed to the back burner and only used kind of when it's really too late and too expensive to make meaningful changes in our product design. I also have a keen interest in watching other smart, capable humans, such as my parents, partner, friends, non-tech people who struggle to use digital products every day. And it pains me to hear them say, oh, I'm so stupid, or I'm just not tech savvy, or kind of apologize when they can't do something. And I always remind them, it's the system's fault, it's not yours. And this is where usability kind of comes into play. So today I'm here to teach you about usability and provide some really practical tips, and hopefully make this method a bit more accessible and less intimidating to perform, especially for designers and UX professionals. As Preet mentioned, there will be hopefully time at the end for QA. However, I know that sometimes questions just pop into your head, and so if you want to drop those questions in the chat, feel free to do that kind of as you think of them, and we'll see how many we can get to. So let's get started here. I want to just give some quick theory and overview of this method before we kind of jump into the how and the why. So usability, what is it? It's a technique for informing and evaluating your design decisions for an interface by testing them with representative users. It's all about learning what works and what doesn't work, and removing risk from your design process. I want to make one distinction here, and that is the distinction between usability and design utility. So this is a question I often get from stakeholders when they're asking, let's perform a usability test, and what we really want to know is, how many people are going to adopt our product. And, that's not what usability testing is for. So we have, this idea of design utility, and that's referring to whether product or website is actually providing what people need out of it, has the right features, is valuable in that sense, compared to usability, which refers to how easy and pleasant these features are to use when someone is actually, in this product and kind of using it. So our ultimate goal for any product experience is usefulness. So it's useful if it provides the features that somebody needs and it's easy to use. And we obviously want both of these things to be true for any project, any design. But today we're really going to focus on usability and making sure that our interfaces and our experiences are frictionless and as easy to use as possible. So let's kind of move forward. Let's talk about what we're actually talking about when we say usability, what makes something usable. So there's 5 quality components of usability, things that we want to make sure our design is able to do in order for us to say that it's usable. The first being learnability. So a first-time user comes to your site or your app, how easy is it for them to accomplish basic tasks? Basically, how intuitive is this? The second is efficiency. So being able to complete tasks quickly and easily with as little friction as possible. The third one here, memorability. So coming back to an interface after not using it for a long time, how quickly can people pick up on those things again? So if you've ever kind of come back to a website and say, oh, I always forget where this button is, or I always forget how to change my password, that system isn't as usable because you haven't necessarily learned the right way to use it. Errors, of course, we want things to be error-free. We're observing to see how many errors people actually make and whether they can recover from these errors, so making sure that those things are in place. And lastly, satisfaction. So how pleasant is the system to use compared to being potentially difficult or frustrating. So it's not necessary that we're actually testing for every single one of these in a system, but when we say, our app is usable, kind of does it check all of these boxes? And that's what we're thinking about. Again, not related to whether these features are valuable or whether someone will adopt this tool, just can they use it in the way that it was intended to be used? So let's talk a little bit about when you should conduct usability testing. Common but incorrect thinking is that our designs aren't ready to test. We're not ready to put them in front of people. And this comes up a lot from our design folks, just because we know it's difficult to kind of share rough drafts of things and not put things in front of people because you feel they're not, good enough or ready. But, it's definitely optimal to put things in front of people as early as possible. We always say your design will be tested whether you plan for it or not. Once your system goes live and people start to use it, they're testing it. And rather than collecting feedback in a low risk research setting, where you can learn and adapt to changes, you'll actually have this be live and have a bunch of unhappy customers on your hands and costing a lot of money to fix it later. So, if you think about a product like, a banking app, for example, if people can't figure out how to pay their bill on time, that's a huge problem. And so we want to be able to fix these problems early and test things often. So there's 2 different ways we can test. The first is, throughout your development process, as you're creating your design ideas and you're iterating, and this is called a formative evaluation. So you're learning as you go and you're kind of iterating on those ideas, and these tests are very qualitative in nature. So learning tidbits as you go, making updates. You can also definitely usability test once your site is live after you've shipped. So evaluating usability over time, conducting benchmark testing, and these are what we refer to as summative testing because they happen at the end, and they're typically more quantitative in nature, so we're testing with larger groups of people and we're tracking metrics like how quickly someone can complete a task in general. So definitely there is no bad time to test a design. In terms of how you would go about setting this up, I want to introduce this just very basic 5-step research design process. And this template or this process lends itself to pretty much any research method. And so in any project that I would have, I'm always going to follow these 5 steps, starting off with defining our goals. What do we actually need to learn? Secondly, selecting a method and planning out, how are we going to learn this? How are we going to go about answering our research questions? Executing on that research, pulling together our learnings in the synthesis phase, doing some sense making, and then actually applying that knowledge. So, so what? What should we do about this information? How can we make an impact moving forward? And so today, in terms of usability, I'm going to be focusing on the first 3 steps and how to kind of get started with the usability plan and execute really effective sessions. So potentially in a future session talking about the latter half of this, but today really focusing in on the first 3 steps. So let's talk about the first step, definition. As I mentioned before, it's the first step in any research process. It's time to build alignment with your team, understand the priorities, what are our assumptions that we need to be testing, and basically what are we trying to learn? So why are we doing this research? What are the big questions? So there's a bunch of steps that kind of come into this definition phase. As I mentioned first, the goals and objectives are paramount and building alignment on this. So what I typically do at the beginning of any usability research project is I get all of the key decision makers in a room together, whether that's our PM, our designer, potentially other stakeholders, and we sit together and we discuss what are the top of mind questions, what are the big assumptions that we want to put in front of people that we feel like these are going to be the focus of our session. And I crowdsource those things because, as you may have heard, in any kind of research project, the more you involve your stakeholders, the more buy-in they're going to have in your results once you actually complete your session. And it's much more likely that they're going to take your findings into consideration and want to apply those things. So I bring people into that process right away, and we kind of talk about, okay, what's in scope for this session? What flows do we need to put through? Is it the forgot password flow? Is it the, add a new person to this account flow? Basically, I think if you're working in a product company, you ideally would have a roadmap and kind of what's coming up and what, needs to be tested there. Really try to limit yourself to, 1 to 3 really strong objectives or research questions. For every additional question that you ask, or that you want answered, the quality of insights for your other research goals is going to drop. So basically, you want to maximize the value of time that you have with users and make the most out of it by prioritizing those research questions, really scoping them down. You can always kind of table the rest of the questions for future phases, but really kind of get in that focused mindset. The next thing you're going to want to discuss is, who are you going to put this in front of? Who are your testers going to be? Who will you test with? How will you reach them? And how many users will you need? Which is always a fun question to answer. And we're going to talk about that a little bit now. So of course, it's really dependent on your project goals, who you're going to test with and how many people that you need. You want to consider, of course, whether you're doing a more formative, iterative study that's more qualitative in nature compared to a summative evaluation. For formative testing and qualitative testing, we hear, the 5 users rule kind of come up quite a bit. You only need to test your design with 5 users and then you're good to go. There's definitely some important caveats with this. 5 users in general is a good rule of thumb per user group for qualitative testing, so that you can make iterations. Also, really ideal if you're going to do multiple rounds of testing so that you can identify the highest severity usability issues, make some important updates, and then test again with 5 more users. And it's really dependent on your product. So you definitely would need to test with additional users if you have highly distinct user groups that you're trying to compare. So for example, if you have, first-time mobile users compared to people that use this all of the time, you might want to have 2 different groups. If you have a platform that caters to multiple user groups, potentially in like a B2B setting, you might have like your admin people versus your like regular users. Depending on how many things you want to test, it's in general 5 people per test group per round in a qualitative setting. And if you are doing more like metrics and benchmarking, you'd want to up that to like 20 to 30 people per round at least, so that you can actually have data that you can depend on a little bit more. If you're testing a product with safety or risk implications, you definitely want to make sure that you do multiple rounds of testing so that you can identify as many issues as possible before you launch. If it's a little bit low risk and you're really just trying to learn, you can definitely limit that. This is a big topic of discussion and something stakeholders will often ask, is 5 people enough? Again, when we bring back to our goals, usability is about identifying patterns and observing issues that people run into. And typically I would recruit like 5 to 8 people per round to account for, either participants that aren't really great or sometimes people don't show up. I find it gives me a good number to play with. The next one here is around your format. So you have your number of users. Let's say, we're going to test with 5 users on mobile, 5 users on desktop. Now, where are you going to do these? Is it going to happen remotely or in person? Is it going to be moderated or unmoderated? So are you actually going to be facilitating, or is it going to be an online tool that's doing that for you? How much time are you going to need to cover all of your content? If it's a well-scoped research session, I like to do between half an hour and 45 minutes, just because it allows us to keep things really tight and focused. I have run tests before that went, an hour. Depending on how much you're paying people, they will stay engaged or not for an entire hour. And so I would say to limit that as much as possible. The format and setting decision obviously has a lot of logistical implications. So once you decide that, it's going to help your planning process a lot. And budget, don't expect good data for free. You need to incentivize your participants in some way or another. We pay all of our participants in either gift cards or through a platform that recruits for us. But again, if you're working with limited budget, it really is important to be able to tell your stakeholders, why this testing is important, and to kind of get a little bit more money so that you can pay people and that they'll be engaged and focused in your sessions. The next thing to talk about is your prototype. So what level of fidelity do we need? And fidelity in this case is referring to how closely your prototype matches the look and feel of your real system or the final system. Visuals, interactivity, content, how functional does this thing need to be to achieve our research goals? So I provided this chart here that kind of breaks down, depending on your testing focus and goals, what level of fidelity you might actually need. This is an iterative design process. Again, lower cost, lower amount of time to create something that's super quick. Concept drawings will give you an understanding, do people understand what this concept is? Do they get the value proposition? Is it clear? Up into, a click-through prototype where your goal might actually be to understand functionality and the workflow that somebody's going through. I really try to help and work with designers to say, you don't need something super high fidelity to get good feedback on it. In some cases, users won't give you as good feedback when your site is like more beautifully designed, because They think that it looks like a finished product, and they're just going to be like, oh yeah, this is great. Maybe, you know, update a couple of these things here. But when it comes to UI and it comes to the, you know, those little pieces of functionality, wireframes are definitely great to test with. This just goes back to the idea, you know, test it early, get those learnings early, and continue to update. So we've defined kind of what your prototype needs to be able to do and what people are going to do in it. And the last thing for this phase is really just the timeline. When's testing going to start? How many rounds are you going to do? And when will the results be delivered to your stakeholders? Really definitely provide yourself 3 to 4 days to do synthesis at the end. So, you know, there's been times where I've promised results early, you know, been really optimistic and had some late nights trying to pull together all this data. Give yourself time. You need to have that time to make sense of your data. So just keep that in mind when you're building your timeline. Okay, let's talk about, oh, this one, yes. After you've done this session, it's best practice to summarize it all and send it back to your stakeholders so that you can say, this is what we agreed to, this is my plan, I'm gonna move forward, kind of get everybody's last check so that you can start, and that everybody's kind of agreed to the plan and knows how, you know, what's gonna happen next. So I always do this immediately following this alignment session. I pull together just a one-pager overview of what I'm gonna do, and I share it with everybody just to get that green light, and I can start, and I'm not blocked by anything there. Okay, now you've defined all of these constraints, you can start to plan your session, planning it so that your sessions will run smoothly. You want to create a plan that's going to align with those initial study objectives and constraints. So again, if you've agreed on a pretty strict timeline and then you come back with a plan that has like 4 phases and design updates within every phase, that's obviously not realistic plan. If your plan and objectives are to understand how different groups are going to interact with the same design, or if version A is going to be better than version B, you obviously need to create a plan that's going to allow time for you to be able to do those things. So how straightforward is this going to be? The first things first, before you recruit any participants, is to review that prototype. I've been in situations before where I'm like, yep, designers got it, I'm good to go, I'm going to recruit, and then I have a participant scheduled for in the next couple of days, and I come back and hear, oh, the prototype's not ready yet. And that's a really big problem because, someone's already spending time to come do a session and we don't have things ready for them. So review that prototype, make sure all of the data is, accurate and non-distracting, make sure all the paths are clickable, all the back buttons work. You have no hotspots kind of shining brightly, our blue Envision hotspots. Definitely take those out. When I say non-distracting data, an example here from banking would be, we were testing a site and had somebody go to their account details, and the designer had just kind of put in some dummy content that said the person had like $50 million in their bank account. And that's super distracting for a participant when we're trying to just get them to send an e-transfer, and then they get to this page and there's $50 million, and all of a sudden they go off on this tangent about how they're a millionaire now, and that's so funny. Which that's just a distraction, and so we want to make sure we limit that as much as possible. This is, I don't know if this video will, because it's a PDF, but I wanted to show that you do have the ability in Envision to remove hotspot hinting. It is in the settings for your share link. There's a lot of times I've worked with designers and they've said, oh yeah, I'll take out all the hotspots, don't worry. And what they've actually done is take out the ability to click anything, as in the hotspots are not active. And so the hotspots need to stay active, but we want to disable the hinting that comes with those blue flashy lights. In a usability session, someone kind of comes in and sees a blue flashy light, they know exactly where to click, and all of our data is lost. So just to say that. Okay, second, recruit your users. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how to write an effective screener, but you can find this information definitely. When you're screening people, you want to look back into your participant criteria. What do we need from these people? and you want to be, not too obvious about your testing goals so that you get people who are kind of lying and tricking the screener. For example, if you want people who cycle, your screener shouldn't ask, do you ride your bike to work? Yes or no. You should ask something more like, which of the following modes of transportation have you used to get to work in the past 3 months? And then list a bunch of them and filter out anybody who doesn't bike. And that's just a way to make sure that people aren't kind of gaming your system and just wanting to kind of get in on all of these testing sessions. The next thing we want to do is actually write our testing scenario. So this is the meat of your test. This is, what you're actually going to have people do once they encounter your website. So, update your profile picture, recover your password. These are all the tasks that you have. So you have all your flows. So now you're going to put these into a story that somebody can read and follow along. The scenario is kind of like a character card for an actor that they might get. It puts them into context. And gives them a sense of like why they're performing this task. It gives them some motivation. So let's say you want, someone to check an account balance. You might say, congrats, you just got paid. Why don't you go in and check whether or not you got your money? And then you can watch them do that. We'll talk a little bit more about writing effective scenarios next. So you're preparing your instruments, you're building out those scripts with all of your scenarios, you're creating any kind of note-taking documents that your team might need. We love to use the Rainbow spreadsheet. It's just a really quick way to keep all of your data in one place. There's obviously other tools out there, online whiteboards like Mural, or even just physical sticky notes to kind of keep track of these things. So just do what works for you here. 5, these are all like logistical things, but honestly, when you're planning, just having this checklist and going through it. So book your spaces, quiet spaces if you're doing them remotely. You want to make sure you're not having people barge in, that if you have a half-an-hour session, you book a room for an hour so that you can just, stay and update things if you need to. Number 6 is super important, so pilot test. So this actually involves you taking your script, taking your prototype, and testing it with somebody internally who doesn't know a lot about your project. This is gonna help you time your session, update any wording that might be awkward. So if you give someone a task and they're like, what do you mean? I don't know how to do this. You've caught that before you've kind of spent $50 and now you have a participant who doesn't know what to do. Number 7, invite observers. So as I said earlier, the more people are involved in your research, the more buy-in they're gonna have. Invite them to watch. It's such a different experience when you see somebody struggle with something compared to if you hear it through broken telephone. I always share my whole testing schedule with my team. These are all the time slots. Here's the link to the Zoom where you can see them. Here's the note-taking document. And I provide them with some instructions on how they could actually observe sessions effectively, what to look for, what to listen for, and all of these kinds of things. So let's talk about scenario writing. So again, these are the tasks that you're giving your participant in the session. You want to make sure that people know what to do. Biggest thing here is that you never want your scenario to include words or phrases that can be found on the interface, because then it just becomes a word search activity. You're not really getting what you need out of your session. So if you are doing a recover a forgot password flow and you tell the person you forgot your password, what would you do? They're obviously going to click forgot password. So you need to create a scenario that is specific but doesn't give everything away. So first is to make it realistic. So you take the user goal. The goal in this case would be, okay, we want someone to be able to browse the products and buy something. One task might be purchase a pair of orange Nike running shoes. This is really specific and not the most realistic task that someone would actually come to the website and have in mind of what they're going to do. I mean, unless they're having a really specific Halloween costume, who knows? But we're going to say something a little bit more general, like buy a pair of shoes for less than $40, because then they're going to be browsing, they're going to be looking for things and actually buy it. So make it realistic. The second one here, make it actionable. So you're in a testing session. A lot of the time people will just respond verbally if you're not really specific about how they should do those things. So for example, we want someone to find a movie and show times. If we say, you know, you want to go see a movie on Sunday, go to this website and tell me where you would click next, they will literally open the website and then turn to you and start talking to you about what they would do next and not actually show you on the interface. So you want to be really specific about, okay, go to this website and find a movie. Like, go do that thing right now, so that you're not like, they don't just tell you and then you're like, okay, cool, like, can you show me how to do it now? Definitely make that really specific. And this is the big one again, don't describe the steps or provide those clues. So we want someone to look up their grades. We're not going to say, you know, you want to see the results of your exam, go to the website, sign in, and then do this. If we want that as part of the session, we need to just tell them what to do without describing it too much. So let's talk about execution. So you've planned your session, you know when it's happening, you have your timelines, everything's booked, you've practiced, your stakeholders are coming, you're ready to go. Now you're like, oh crap, I have to facilitate these sessions. So one thing I didn't talk about earlier is please don't test your own designs. This is just injecting bias directly into your process. If possible, partner up with somebody else and have another person facilitate when it's something that you have designed. As humans, we are conditioned to ignore information that goes against our beliefs and what we think is good. And when we see users who don't like something or are encountering errors, it's really easy for you, even unconsciously, to kind of ignore that information if you're the facilitator. And so it's really important that you have somebody who isn't the key designer actually facilitating these sessions. So let's talk. Things a facilitator is not. So you are not a tour guide. So you're not there to kind of show somebody around your app and point out all of the things that it's able to do, and say, oh yeah, and this is your profile and this is where you go to do this. So you're not a tour guide. They're the ones that are supposed to be experiencing the design. You're not a salesperson. So you're not there to convince them and like give them this pitch for why this product is so great and awesome. Let's just nix that there. You're not an interviewer. So you're not in a user interview. You're not trying to like, you know, really get to know their like needs and motivations. It's definitely more, less of a conversation and more of just you're providing these scenarios and you're observing the behavior. Very different than a user interview. There's 3 basic acts for usability testing. You have your opening, you have the middle, and you have your closing section. So in the opening, you're going to do a little orientation, get the person comfortable. In the middle, you're going to basically provide those scenarios and observe the behavior that's going on. And then you're going to close with some debrief and some feedback. So our opening session, the goal here is really to put the person at ease and get them comfortable with what they're about to do. So you're establishing rapport. You're saying, you know, oh, how was your morning? How was your commute? What's going on with you today? Maybe like if you're doing remote research, oh, where are you calling us from? How are things going over there? Just really get the person comfortable. They've likely not participated in something like this before. It's important that you disclose the purpose of the research and that you're going to be recording the session and asking for consent for those recordings is paramount. You're going to explain their rights and the protocol. So on the right-hand side, I have a sample of kind of the things that I would go through. So all the information is confidential. It's kept anonymously. You can stop the session at any time, and you can take breaks at any time. Big one here, it's not a test. So often we say it's a usability test. Whenever I talk to participants, I try to never use the word test. It's always, you know, welcome to our session. We're here to like, you know, evaluate our design, or we're here to kind of get feedback on our designs and you're going to help us do that. It's not a test. There's no right or wrong answers. The next one here, I didn't design this, so please don't worry about hurting my feelings. Kind of speak your mind and say whatever you want. Again, asking for permission for that recording and being really clear about how you're going to use that recording. If you have NDAs, you would typically have somebody sign this, or they would be signing it beforehand in whatever platform that you may have recruited them from. Sometimes that happens, but here's also a time where you might be signing NDAs. So this is the meat of your test, the middle. This is your kind of facilitation time. And so you're running people through your test task, and you're sitting back and shutting up and observing what's going on. What you do need to do at the beginning is kind of explain any prototype limitations that might be there. So I say, you know, this is a prototype. Not everything's going to work as it's supposed to, but definitely, you know, use this as you normally would. And if anything doesn't work, like we'll talk about maybe what you were expecting was going to happen, but don't let that prevent you from kind of like exploring how you would normally do that. The second is to talk about your think aloud protocol. So please think out loud as you go through. Basically remove the filter from your brain to your mouth. If something surprises you, if something, you know, happens that you didn't expect, like talk to me about that. You might have to remind people a couple of times throughout, oh, and like, you know, remember to think out loud. And I also have participants read things out loud if they're reading anything on the screen, just so that I can follow along with what they're doing. I say, you know, if you have questions about what you're seeing, ask them, but I can't always answer those because we're interested to see kind of how people do when they don't have someone sitting beside them. But the questions are really great because it shows us where they might be experiencing some confusion. I want to talk about some approaches that you might take for interrupting or answering people. I find with facilitation, this is the biggest challenge that people have, is not being able to just sit back and watch, but trying to interject and trying to help people too much. Remember, you want people to show you their real behavior. So if they're struggling and they're having like a tough time, that's really good data for you to see. And there are times where you might want to interject, but in general, you don't want to do that. So I'll just talk about some techniques here. The first is the echo. So you essentially repeat the last thing that somebody says in almost like a questioning way. Actually makes them just discuss that a little bit more. So you want a little bit more information. So here they're like, this button is weird, I'm not sure. And you might say, not sure what, or button is weird. Actually has them start to talk about why that is, and they'll kind of fill in the gaps for you. So that's a really effective way. We use this in user interviews as well, just to like literally repeat the last thing that somebody says. You can practice this with other people in general conversation. It's kind of fun. The boomerang is basically someone asks you a question and you just ask them a question right back. So someone gets to a point like, do I have to create an account to buy this? And they look at you almost like you should provide the answer. And this is when you kind of say, what's your understanding of that? Or, you know, if you were alone and you were doing this by yourself, what would you do? Or what would you think? What do you think about this? It really helps us understand why they're having these questions. Don't answer questions for them. It's really good for you to know that they're confused at this point. You might also say, you know, what do you think? And if they're like, yeah, you know what, I really don't know, we might say, okay, how would you get more information about that? Or what would you do if you were confused at this point and you didn't know what to do next? So that's something that we would do as well. The last one is, it's kind of like trailing off while you're repeating what the person is saying. This one is also really effective. You kind of form less complete sentences and pause a lot. And users will jump in because they don't like these uncomfortable pauses. And they'll actually respond really quickly and without kind of letting you finish your thoughts. So this person, if I close here, will I lose my work? So you're wondering if and they will kind of jump in and complete the sentence for you. You get a lot of really good data out of that. When we think about usability testing here too, it's really like, don't leave data on the table. If someone's like confused or questioning, that's when you want to jump in and probe them further. Why are they confused? So if all we did here was like, oh, this person doesn't know if they should close, we miss that really great insight of, you know, they're seeing close, cancel, and they're not really sure the difference between those things. And that's really what we're interested in learning, is the why behind the confusion. Just a general rule, if you're not sure whether to interrupt, just count to 10 in your head and then decide if you should intervene. Typically, people will just continue talking. Again, silence is uncomfortable. If you're a facilitator, get used to it. You're the one in control, you're the one in power, and you want to be able to just sit back and watch what's happening. If people are really super, super stuck, they've tried like 3 times, they can't figure it out, that's the point where I would intervene. So potentially they just like cannot find the login button. They have no idea where it is. I might say, you know, have you found, you know, is there anywhere else on the page? You might be able to do that. They still have no idea. They're kind of like, I don't know how to do this. That's the point where I might actually point something out on the page and just kind of say, I want to bring your attention to like this area of the page. What's your understanding of that? And then that's usually where they're like, oh, I honestly didn't even notice that. Like, okay, that's, I guess, where I'm supposed to log in. And so it's not saying, okay, this is where you log in. It's kind of saying, I want to bring your attention over here and like talk me through what you think that is. In closing, so you've kind of watched the person go through, you're documenting, you know, all of the clicks that they're taking, all the questions that they're having, your note takers are there as well. That's something I didn't mention. You should never be conducting these solo unless you plan to painstakingly go back and watch every video that you're taking. Having a note taker who's dedicated to just observing all of these things is really awesome. It's extremely difficult to take notes and facilitate effectively at the same time. When I facilitate, I definitely take little scribbly notes just so that I can, you know, when I reach this point here, I can go back to specific screens or pages and ask more in-depth questions. But I'm not the primary note taker if I'm facilitating. Once you close, you finish your task, you might want to do a little debrief here. So talk to me about your experience. What was your impression of that? What are some things that you really liked? What are some things that you really didn't like? Was there anything missing? We like this magic wand question as well. What would you change about this experience? If it's like doing something about comprehension, like e-commerce and like buying something, I always kind of ask too, like, you know, after you've gone through this, like, do you still have questions about this product, or like, do you still have concerns or things that like this tool or product wasn't able to answer for you? So that's helpful to see about missing information. And you want to thank people for their time. So like, thank you so much. That was super helpful. Your feedback is really great. And just make them feel like they've contributed something important, and that their time was really helpful. Just some final tips and tricks in summary. So, you know, test earlier than you think that you need to. When you're recruiting people, you know, don't stress over this unless you have like a really specific user group. In general, for usability, if you're recruiting representative people, unless they need like really specific domain knowledge, as long as you're kind of in the general sphere, you're still going to get really good data. If you need to test with your actual users, definitely do that. Your tasks should be realistic, actionable, and avoid any clues. Pilot test. And when it comes to facilitation, practice makes perfect. I wasn't perfect at my facilitation when I started, but I had some really great mentors who put me in and said, okay, it's your turn now. Like, I'll let you facilitate 1 or 2. And that was my way of learning. So I got to come in and facilitate a couple. I got really good coaching and feedback from my mentors and my superiors. And I was able to really get comfortable in these kinds of sessions. I think a lot of people are just really nervous that they're going to say something to like mess up all the results. The best advice I can give you is just say less, listen more, and observe what people are actually doing on the design. There's a couple of resources here. There's tons of stuff online. Rocket Surgery Made Easy is a great book. It's like pick it up, read it, DIY version of usability testing for someone who's not as experienced. Nielsen Norman Group has fabulous articles and coaching. And then there's a couple other links that I put here. I'm going to check out to see what questions we have that have been curated for me.
For covering so much content.
Oh
that
yeah,
was really amazing. Yeah, let's have a virtual round of applause for Danielle. I even have audio actually. Right.
Oh, thanks, Preet.
No, that was really amazing. That was just so much information, so well documented. It was really, really helpful. We do have some interesting and really good questions. There is one from Bella who asked about, like, how do you prevent users from becoming too task focused during the usability testing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's something that I experience all the time. And so, for example, I'm testing something right now to do with e-commerce. And, one thing that we needed to test was our cart and checkout process. And we had someone, actually like purchase this product. So right away, they're like, okay, product, got the product, purchase, go. And without actually like putting themselves really in that experience of buying it. So there's a couple of ways I try to remind them every step of the way, like, so they're like, okay, should I just do this? I'm like, if this were you and you were buying this thing, what else would you be doing here? Like, talk me through that. Because often the reason people are task focused is because they think that's what you want them to be. And so they feel like if they do anything else in the session, they're like wasting your time or like giving you information that's not really valuable. So it's just kind of encouraging them as well to like, yeah, if this were you, like what questions would you have here? Like what would you be doing here? Unless you're doing the more like metrics-based usability testing where you are just literally concerned how quickly can someone check out with this product and you do really want that nuance. You could also form your tasks to be a little bit more exploratory. So I might say, rather than buy this item, I might say, look and see the different options available to you, read about the features, and like talk to me about like what your understanding is of those things. And in that case, we would actually have people like scrolling and reading a lot of content.
Right. So you focus more on the like how they are even exploring and discovering the product rather than just kind of making it very transactional. That's amazing. And then we had one question early on. I think you can see it in the chat part, which was from Gabrielle and specific to game design. Especially, and we have quite a few folks, especially in the Vancouver design community, that are in game design. So I don't know if you've had any kind of like exposure to that part of the community or those kind of tasks.
Yeah, not really, but I am looking at this question, and it seems to be the comment about you're not your user, but often in this setting with the gaming, they are also the users because they do like play this game and interact with it. And I think the question is, how do we make people understand that we need to test, playability, and it's not just for like people to test the game and like tell us that they really like the game. I think, go ahead.
Before you jump in, just a quick point was that I think the underlying question is also kind of how do you help companies remove the bias when, especially, or see the value of usability testing when the product can be a little generic. And I've faced that in different companies when it came to things like buying homes, and you can be like, well, I'm buying a home, so I'm a user, and it kind of applies to a larger audience. So yeah, sorry.
No, absolutely. And what I like to say, is educate first of all around bias in general. So it comes up so much just in our terminology and like the way we refer to things. If somebody outside of our context in our industry like sat in on a meeting, they'd be like completely lost. Like, what are you guys talking about? It's the same kind of thing of like, if I left one industry and went to another, it would take me a long time to kind of get used to the way you're talking about things. And that's a really good metaphor for like thinking about the way we design things is the way we think it makes sense to us. So even, in a game, yes, you are a player, and that, your user is a player, but your user isn't like a software designer. Your user isn't like a user experience designer. And so it's much more about like the domain knowledge of like being behind the curtain and being the one that kind of sees all of the context of the design. When you are in the organization, you see all of that, and you kind of forget that the average person like doesn't think about things the same way that you do. I think the best way to do this is to just start testing. I know that like a lot of people don't get the budget to do these kinds of things, but even if you can do it low cost, easy way, as soon as you kind of show somebody that they can understand it, when you show them a video of somebody like unable to do a really basic task, it just really opens people's eyes. And I think that's one of the best techniques I've had.
Yeah, that's really true. Show, don't tell. Always works. Usually works. We don't have a lot of time, so we can take one last question. And there are two questions that I'm a little torn between. I think one question that many folks, including myself, have faced in the past, and many people in our community, especially designers, do work in really small teams, especially in startups. So the question came from Mary early on, which was like, what advice do you have for designers that fall under UX team of one, right? And you're wearing multiple hats.
Yes. So this is a special circumstance where you may be able to facilitate and test your own designs. However, I would strongly encourage you to, try to rally some other people around to help support you in these kinds of activities. Planning and facilitating and managing all of these logistics while also like adhering to your other responsibilities is obviously a lot of, and that's kind of where I think it falls to the back burner, especially if you don't have a lot of budget to outsource this kind of stuff. So there are tools that allow you to outsource usability testing. Usertesting.com is one example where you're basically setting up your test and kind of allowing it to be run unmoderated, so kind of saving yourself some time there. I think if you are testing your own designs, like you just have to be aware of all of the biases that are coming along with that. I think like testing things poorly is almost worse than not testing at all. And I hate to say that, but it can be true. So I would just say, be very careful about how you're doing it. I don't want to say like, I don't want to scare people away from this technique. So some options would be like outsourcing if you can, if you have the capacity and the tools. Definitely just put it in front of people, do it yourself, see what you're learning, and just kind of checking those biases every time you can. Right.
Cool, Danielle. Thank you so much. This was really amazing. I don't have my clap audio again, but everyone's having a strong round of applause for you. So thank you so much for for helping us with this amazing content on how do you plan and facilitate usability sessions. Just before we end, we just have a very few quick updates. Ladder's conference is coming up in Toronto. So if you are an early stage designer, we're really excited about hosting one full day of programming focused on early stage designers. You can go to ladders.design and get more details. Also, we'll be announcing a few more speakers. Really excited about them too later this week. And then, let's make sure we carry forward the conversations on our Slack group. If you're not part of the Slack group, you can go to designx.community/Slack. And we can carry forward the conversation. Some questions that weren't answered right now during the webinar, we can definitely continue to discuss the same. So thank you so much. Thanks once again.
Thanks for having me. And I'm just so happy to hear that people are liking this content. And please go and try to do some usability testing.
Absolutely. I really hope this inspires quite a few folks to, as you said, try and leave that ego behind and the bias, and focus on the user. So yeah, thank you so much once again. Hopefully we'll have a follow-up session, down the road on the next phase.
Yes, the
Of
next steps.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you once again, Danielle.
Okay,
Thanks.
thanks so much.
See you. Bye.
Bye. Cool, cool.